thought I was opening the printer folder. That was all. A permission slip for my niece's field trip had to be signed before 8. The next morning, my laptop had died halfway through charging, and Nolan had already left for work with the only device in the apartment that still talked to the printer without a fight. So I used his. The kitchen was still carrying yesterday on its back. 1 lunch container in the sink. 2 cups by the couch. A sweatshirt hanging off the dining chair like it had tried to sit down and given up. A spelling packet under a grocery receipt. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic. Just the soft debris of too many people living too close to the edge of their own energy. For 6 weeks, that apartment had felt like a train station no one was fully in charge of. My niece, Tessa, had been staying with us while my sister sorted out a housing disaster 2 towns over. Nolan's son was with us every school week because his ex had started a night shift rotation. I was still doing payroll cleanup from a staffing mess at the dental office where I worked. Nolan said his quarter-end numbers were crushing him. Everyone in that apartment was tired enough to become less generous than they meant to be. At least that was the story I had been telling myself. The folder was called Receipts. That should have meant nothing. People name folders stupid things all the time. But something in me stopped. Maybe because Receipts is an odd name for a place you save printer drivers and tax PDFs. Maybe because the folder sat by itself instead of inside documents. Maybe because tired women learn to trust the tiny pause before a bad answer arrives. I clicked it. Inside were thumbnails. Dozens of them. The edge of the kitchen counter, with dishes stacked near the faucet. The living room rug covered in puzzle pieces, and 1 turned-over sock. A cereal spill near the high chair. 3 trash bags by the door from the morning the chute jammed and I had to leave for work anyway. A close-up of Tessa's backpack half unzipped with papers sticking out. A blurry shot of me asleep on the couch in my scrubs. Chin tucked down, 1 shoe still on. I stared long enough for the thumbnails to stop looking like a folder and start looking like a point. Every photo had a date. Every date matched a day I remembered as survivable until that moment. The afternoon the school called because Owen had forgotten his inhaler. The Thursday my sister cried in the parking lot because her landlord had changed the locks early. The Monday I got home from work, reheated chicken nuggets, and sat on the floor beside the coffee table because there were no clean bowls left, and 1 didn't have the strength to care. None of those days had felt noble. But none of them had felt shameful either. They had just felt lived. Then I opened the first image. And the second. And the 9th? The 9th one was the worst. Not because of what it showed. Because of where it had been sent. At the bottom of the screen, under the image preview, there was a share trail. Forwarded to Claire. Forwarded to Mark S. Forwarded to Dad. Forwarded to work group. Work group. I actually leaned closer, as if distance might make the words rearrange themselves into something less exact. But they stayed where they were. My worst days had not just been collected. They had been distributed. That was the moment the room changed. Up until then, I had still been trying to build a reasonable explanation. Maybe he meant to show 1 picture to his sister and ask whether we should hire a cleaner for a month. Maybe he was venting once. Maybe there was a context that would make this merely stupid instead of cruel. But there is no kind context for a folder like that. Not with dates. Not with repetition. Not with an audience. I clicked a message thread attached to 1 of the photos. The preview only showed a line and a half. But it was enough. Another one of those nights. I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending this is normal. Pretending. That was the word that hollowed me out. Because pretending means there is a truer public version waiting somewhere off stage. Pretending means someone has already cast you in the wrong role and is collecting supporting material. Pretending means the dishes are not the point. You are. I heard the lock turn before I realized how long I had been sitting there. Nolan stepped inside, balancing takeout and his gym bag, and gave me the tired smile of a man who thought the night would be ordinary. Then he saw his laptop open. Then he saw my face. People say guilt looks obvious. It doesn't. Not always. Sometimes it looks like a person trying to decide which version of themselves might still survive the next 10 seconds. He set the takeout on the counter carefully, too carefully, and said, "What happened?" I turned the screen toward him. I didn't accuse. I didn't cry. I just asked, "How long have you been doing this?" His eyes moved once across the thumbnails. That was enough. He knew exactly what I meant. "Nadia," he said, and then stopped. He used the voice people use when they want the first word to count as effort. I asked again, "How long?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "A little while. A little while." There are answers so evasive they become their own confession. I said, "You sent them to people." He didn't deny it. That hurt more than if he had lied. He said, "I needed perspective." Perspective. Such a polished word for dragging outsiders into a private room. I looked back at the screen, the sock on the rug, the dishes, the trash bags. A woman asleep in daylight because she had run out of places to stand. And I realized something then that I wish I had understood sooner. He had never photographed the whole apartment. Not once. There were no pictures of the school forms I kept organized in labeled folders. No pictures of the medicine chart on the fridge. No pictures of the folded uniforms, the grocery lists, the emergency overnight bag I had packed for Tessa, the birthday cupcakes I stayed up making from a box mix because store-bought felt too sad that week. He had not documented our life. He had curated my failures. I asked, "Did you ever send anyone the parts one handled?" He frowned, like the question was unfair. That wasn't the point. Exactly, that wasn't the point. The point was never truth. The point was shape. A version of the story where he became the man enduring something and I became the thing being endured. He started talking faster then. Said he was overwhelmed. Said he felt like he was drowning too. Said he needed someone to tell him he wasn't crazy for thinking the apartment had gotten bad. Said his dad had been worried about the kids. Said Claire only saw 1 or 2 pictures. Said the work group was private. As if private humiliation is a kinder genre. I listened longer than I expected to. Not because his explanation helped. Because I was trying to find one sentence in it that sounded like help instead of image management. There wasn't one. Not one mention of taking over dinner. Not one mention of calling a cleaner. Not one mention of asking his sister to take Tessa for a weekend. Not one mention of staying home from the gym on Thursdays when he knew I was barely upright by 7. Just photos. And witnesses. He said, "I wasn't trying to hurt you." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because people always reach for intention when the action is already sitting on the table between you. I said, "You may not have been trying to help me, but you were definitely trying to describe me." That landed. I could tell because he went still. He said, quieter, "It wasn't like that." I closed the laptop. That sound felt final in a way yelling would not have. Then I said the truest thing I had all night. It doesn't matter what you call it. You saw I was drowning and started taking pictures from the shore. He sat down after that, not close to me, across from me. Which was right. Distance had finally become honest. For a while, neither of us spoke. The takeout cooled in its paper bag. The apartment made its regular noises. A vent kicking on. Pipes settling. Tessa laughing once from the bedroom at something she was watching with headphones on. It all sounded painfully normal. Then Nolan said, "I can delete them." Delete them. As if the injury lived in the folder instead of in the decision. as if disappearing the record would undo the fact that he had needed an audience for my hardest season. I said, "I know you can." He waited for more. I did not give it to him immediately. Because once you understand what has happened, silence stops being confusion and starts becoming measurement. What I was measuring was this. Not whether an apartment can recover from 6 bad weeks. Of course it can. Not whether dishes can be washed and laundry folded and rug fibers vacuumed back into obedience. Of course they can. What I was measuring was whether I could keep living with someone who, when our life became unphotogenic, decided the ugliest useful thing to do was document me for outsiders. By the end of the week, Tessa was back with my sister. The quarter-end crunch at Nolan's job eased. The apartment looked more like itself. Cleaner counters, open floor, a fruit bowl no one was too tired to refill. From the hallway, you could have mistaken us for people who had simply survived a rough patch. But surviving is not the same as staying. I kept thinking about the folder name. Receipts. Not memories. Not cleanup. Not help. Receipts. As if my exhaustion had been a debt he expected to collect from me later. That was when I knew the real problem had never been the mess. Mess can happen in a decent home. Mess can happen in a loving week. Mess can happen while people are still on the same side. What cannot happen if you are truly on the same side is this. One person turning the other person's worst afternoons into a case study for spectators. So I told him I wanted out. Not theatrically. Not in one flaming speech. Just plainly. I said I could forgive stress. I could forgive short tempers, and missed dishes, and bad weeks, and even the cowardice of asking the wrong people for comfort once. But I could not build a future with someone who saw my collapse as content. He cried then. Real tears, I think. I'm not interested in flattening him into a monster. I think he felt ashamed. I think he probably even felt afraid. But shame arriving after exposure is not the same as care arriving on time. I packed over 2 weekends. Nothing cinematic. Storage bins. Coats. The blue lamp from the bedroom. Tessa's forgotten charger. My niece asked why I was labeling boxes in the middle of June, and I told her sometimes people need to make a place visible before they can leave it clean. She nodded, like that made sense. Maybe it did. The last thing I took was not a framed photo or a sentimental sweatshirt. It was a printed sheet from the field trip packet I had meant to grab that first night. Still sitting by the printer. Still waiting to be signed. A tiny reminder that the life he had reduced to evidence was, in fact, still a life. Messy, overfull, human, and mine. If there is a lesson in the folder I wasn't meant to see, it is not that you should fear every quiet partner or every bad season at home. It is this. Be careful of the person who watches your hardest days like they are proof instead of a request. Because the moment someone starts archiving your exhaustion for an audience, the mess is no longer on the counter. It is in the relationship.
Thank you for watching. If this story pulled you in, do me one favor. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so the next one finds you the moment it drops. Remember, nothing is ever just what it seems. See you on the next one.